Breaking news. Here is Joe D'Amato.
This just in. Artists are more expensive than computers. Don't forget to subscribe, and clicking like really helps get this video in more people's feed. Thanks. Also, comment below on this video and tell me what's the most RAM you've seen a frame take on a render farm. What's the largest render you've seen in terms of RAM consumption? I'd love to see what some of your war stories are. So like I said, artists are more expensive than computers. This is something you hear a lot when you're working in a studio. It's done in the context usually of render farms and faster computers, and whether or not workload should be shifted from artists' hands off to the farm where it can do the repetitive crunching and free up the artist to do more work. Sometimes this is in the context of optimizing jobs so that they become smaller and then can go onto the farm. Well, that takes artists time, and like they'll often say, computers are cheaper than artists. Well, at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a very simple calculation that you can make and then show your manager to try to convince them to get you a bigger machine or more RAM or that better video card. So stay tuned for that. Look, RAM defines the jobs these days. We used to worry more about cores and whether or not it could use 4 cores or 8 cores, or whether or not we could get it to run 16 full threads. Now it's pretty much about how much RAM is available on the machine and how do we carve it up, and how much of the farm can the job get if it has this much RAM needed per frame. Now, if you look back at a panel I did in October of 2019, when I spoke there, I was asked what I thought the future was going to bring in the near term regarding changes or needs in technology. And I thought it was a pretty simple equation: more RAM. So let's take a look at that clip really quick.
And what kinds of thoughts do you have on where you might go with the technology going forward?
Well, I think, I honestly think that it's just going to scale up into 1 terabyte, over the next year. Unfortunately, the studios tend, gas fills the container that we provide, and I expect that once some of the studios start getting access to these, they'll start realizing, let the artists move on. So I'm expecting us to see a 1 terabyte footprint, especially with some of the throughput that Cascade Lake's going to provide.
Absolutely. And
so when Intel asked me to speak at that cloud conference, we were just in the process of rolling out our 6240 proc-based render machine. This was rolled up with some pretty heavy RAM. We were rolling those out with 384 gigs of RAM per host. And again, we could, just like our other machines, we could put 4 hosts in 2 rack units of render. So it's still very dense and a lot of RAM. So we were already at 384. And now you look ahead, we're now making machines that have 512 gigs of RAM. And I know for sure that the very same machines that we're deploying to our render farm at Studio Cloud, we're seeing other studios, which will remain nameless, deploying with double the RAM that we're putting in there. So they're actually putting in now 1 terabyte of RAM for a render machine. That's kind of where I thought it was going to go. It's a pretty simple curve. It's not really a miraculous declaration to say it's just going to be more RAM and more RAM and more RAM needed. That's the direction that it's been for many years now. And as these studios start doing greater and greater work, they're going to need more RAM. They're going to need faster video cards. They're going to need faster hard drives. They're going to need faster storage that they're connecting to. It's just generally all upward trending curves. So with render farms, the idea is how do we get back more work and faster? If you look at my playlist here on render farms, including the initial what is a render farm video, which is only 1 minute long, you'll start to see the idea here is the faster the machine or the more machines there is will yield more core hours. In other words, more work that you can get done every hour. You can start getting more and more frames per hour out the door and back to the artist. Artist turnaround time is paramount here. So an artist may want to argue that they need more RAM or a faster machine or a better video card, and they really need to keep in mind how a studio makes decisions with capital expenses versus operational expenses. When they buy a computer, when they buy more RAM, when they're buying more render farm and network capacity, these are capital expenses. These are expenses that often require, a couple of $100,000 all at once. Sometimes it can get up to $1 million bill if you want to do a major overhaul in technology. That needs to be paid all at once. And when it comes to paychecks, sure, artists are expensive, but the reality is an artist is paid out over time. It's an operational expense. Also, when you add more artists, it's always because you're adding more work. So you're always adding more income when you add more artists. However, at the beginning of the year or every couple of years when they're refreshing the farm, they can't really take that same viewpoint. They're looking at a studio viewpoint. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that it's easier to make a smaller operational expense decision than it is to make a very large capital expense decision. There are different people, different budgets involved, and on operational expenses like artist time, those can often be pegged to the show, so the show covers those costs. But those capital expenses are often covered by the studio, and only some of the more sophisticated studios figure out a way to pass on those costs to the shows. The shows can manage a little bit of their own capital expenditure. That's the exception rather than the rule. So if you're an artist or a supervisor and you want to push upward with the argument as to why you need more RAM or a faster machine or a better video card, then let's take a look at this sort of calculation. How much is it worth to increase an artist's productivity? You want to display a return on investment. So let's take a typical well-paid artist at $100,000. It's an easy number to work with. This artist is getting paid annually $100,000, whether that's with or without overtime. I don't care. Let's just make it a simple model. So in visual effects, they might average 5 shots a week or 250 shots per year. That's sort of their rate of productivity. It's a very broad number, but again, let's keep the model simple. On the animation side, instead of shots per week or per year, you might look at the seconds per week or minutes per year. So there, an artist might be putting out 25 seconds per week of output, and they're putting out 21 minutes a year in total output of final frame footage. Now let's take a modest purchase for some RAM or an extra video card, and we'll just call it $2,500, including a little bit of the IT's time to come and install that hardware. So let's assume you're going to add that to the cost, and we're just going to look at the first year. We're not going to talk about whether or not this equipment is good for a couple of years. The reality is the machine you're on is probably already a couple of years old. So buying RAM, it's best to just look at getting one more year out of that purchase. So now the key here is you need to look at your productivity, and this is where you as the artist need to make a little bit of a decision as to how much more productive are you going to be by getting this asset. And mind you, an artist is going to have to make this explanation to a supervisor. So you're not going to be able to fool them. They're going to know your workflow. So you need to come up with a real business reason why you're going to be more productive. Maybe it's your machine's rebooting a lot, or you're spending so much time optimizing shots. If you could just let them run a little faster, you could get done. I'm going to say here that you've come to the conclusion, and you can make the argument that you're going to be 20% more productive if you can just get this one additional resource. And if that's the case, then you can show that instead of it being 250 shots a year, now you can do 300 shots a year. Or if you can do 20.8 minutes before a year, now you can do 25 minutes per year. And for a producer looking at this decision and maybe taking this decision across a whole team of artists, that can actually greatly affect the deliverables in a positive way, where for just another 2.5% of expense, they can get 20% more output. And most producers are going to see that argument. Now, just because they make that argument doesn't mean you're going to get it. There are other factors, like I said, the capital purchase issue, the fact that there are budgets in place that often get used up throughout the year. That money is not going to get assigned to your production. So as a result, there are other factors that may keep you from getting this resource. But I promise you, you're going to almost have zero chance of getting this resource if you can't make a functional business argument as to why this return on investment is worthy. It's up to you to figure out what your efficiency is going to be by getting this resource and then making the argument. And the reason I say taking it to your producer or supervisor is they'll often know your pay, and you can really talk about directly your pay, not the team in general. This is an important part of the equation. Like I said, 2.5% more isn't a lot to spend to get 20% more efficiency. So this is the idea of making sure to demonstrate your return on investment. This should translate to all the decisions that you try to make within a studio. Whenever you're trying to ask for something from IT, you're trying to ask for something from the studio, you need to figure out what's the return on investment. What's the argument to be made so that the company is going to benefit financially by this decision being made? Because if it's just going to cost them more and they're not going to get more output, it's a really hard argument to make. There's a couple of important things to remember about taking this argument upward and outward. Number one, do not take this argument to IT. Don't take it to your IT staff. Don't take it to your technology manager unless you're already in your production meetings with an IT representative. If you're part of the team that works with IT on what your show needs, then it's worthy to make that request at the right time in the right meeting. Most likely you're not, and your producer or your supervisor is, and you need to get that request up into their hands. They are the ones empowered to really take that request to the studio. If you go up to an IT professional like the desktop supervisor or a technology manager and make the explanation why you want more RAM, they're pretty much not listening to you except to find out what your name is so they can go report you back to the production and ask them to have you stop asking them for RAM. It's really not the appropriate route. You should take it through your show. These conversations happen in the beginning of a show and periodically throughout a show, and you really want to channel the conversation to the right place at the right time. That's the key to success. There's a second thing that you really need to keep in mind, especially if you're a supervisor, is something that the IT manager is definitely thinking about. Whatever the largest machine is on the floor, say it's 256 gigs of RAM in some specific heavy machines. Well, that means that they're going to need to have 256 gigs of RAM available for many jobs on the render farm. Most often, the biggest machines that are being worked on the floor by the artists do not equate to the render farm configuration. There may be some machines in the render farm, the latest machines that have the ability to handle jobs as big as that big artist machine can handle, but most likely the machines in your render farm are 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. Those machines likely don't have the RAM or even the processing power that your latest and greatest desktops have. So if you have a huge mismatch, let's say you refresh your entire desktop pool with 128 gigs of RAM, but then when you go to your render farm, only say a quarter of the farm or less has 128 gigs of RAM, you've created a situation where artists are going to create jobs to run locally, they're going to put them on the farm, and there's going to be no farm for those jobs to run on. So when you do make the argument for more RAM, keep in mind that's going to be a counterpoint. If I give you more RAM, don't I have to make sure that I have more RAM on the render farm to handle all the additional jobs that are coming in with the larger RAM footprint? I don't have the answer for you on there. Every studio has a different mix and a different sort of solution to that problem, but that's something that an IT manager is going to be very cognizant of. If I give you more RAM, I have to give the farm more RAM. This is why some of the more well-funded studios are keeping their farms at a higher RAM level, sort of ahead of the artist machine curve. Other studios that are struggling a little bit to build out their farms are finding that the machines they're bringing in are a little larger or pushing what their farm can actually even do. In fact, you'll find in a lot of those studios, those biggest desktop machines are very valuable resources to the render wranglers at night as they try to throw renders on those big desktops that are sitting there quiet at night. So it's something to really keep in mind is what's the IT person's mentality, what's production's mentality, what's the studio manager's mentality when you're trying to tackle the problem. How do I get a bigger, better, faster machine so I can work faster and better? So yes, artists are certainly more expensive than machines, but it's not as simple as just saying, therefore, whatever an artist needs, it should just be handled by buying more technology. It's just simply not that simple. And the studios that do that tend to go bankrupt. I've worked at a couple of them. You don't want to go there. Thanks everyone for your time. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'd love to hear in the comments below, what's the largest job you've seen on your render farm? What's the most amount of RAM you've seen a frame consume? I'd love to see your answers in the comments. Computers. That was repetitive. Rolling out our Intel and please comment on this and please comment on the largest job that you've seen in terms of so comment below on this video. Nope. Also comment below on this video. Nope.
Breaking news! Here is Joe D'Amato. Breaking news. Sorry. Breaking news. Here is Joe.